So chip budding, why would you use chip budding over any other method? The method is sustainable and it can be used to propagate plants outside in the field. And also with the budwood that we're going to be talking about, you have the opportunity of collecting quite a lot of buds on one bud stick. So potentially you could produce a lot more plants in a field than you could by other means of propagation. So you first will need a sharp knife, some tape to tape the chip bud to the rootstock. You need a pair of secateurs as well, which aids cutting the budwood. You also possibly need, with the knife itself, you need to keep that clean, so you need like some form of alcohol. We use methylated spirits diluted here at the zoo. So again, you need to keep your knife clean, particularly between different plants and different cuts. So first of all, you have to select what we call the budwood. So that's material that you can be putting on the chip bud. So when you select the budwood, the material needs to be clean, probably around a pencil thickness, I would say, and the season's growth, so it's not too soft, but it's what we call semi-ripe. So once you select that wood for whatever material it is going to be, you then need to, it's called a chip bud. So what you're doing is selecting the chip out of the budwood. So first of all, you have to do a cut just below a bud. So it goes just inside the material. You can't cut it right through, so it's probably a third of the way through the material. And then you go above the top of the bud, and then with a knife, you draw the knife through. So it removes the bud, but you've got to make sure you don't cut into the bud. You've got to go just slightly behind the bud. So as you draw down, the bud then comes out of the stem, but you've got to make sure you keep the bud clean, so you don't put your finger on it. So use a knife then to take the bud away. So that's the first step. So with the rootstock, you've got to make sure that the rootstock is compatible with the budwood. So it's like an oak tree sign budwood on this oak tree rootstock. And also, depending on the thickness of the budwood does need to be slightly thinner than the rootstock. Yeah, first of all, we need to assess the length of the budwood. So we then measure on the rootstock by putting the lower cut on the rootstock where it's nice and flat, so there's no bumps in it and it's smooth. We then do a cut on the rootstock, which then is the same sort of size as the budwood. So you do a downward cut on the rootstock, starting at the top like the budwood. You then do a cut safely down into the rootstock, and then you then remove the outer bark of the rootstock. We then put the chipwood into the rootstock, but it's got to just be slightly level with each other, so you're actually exposing the cambium layers. But the idea is when you put the two plants together, they then callus up together, and that's how they then form a new plant. So by doing that, there's two different materials we use. One's called a bud tape, so that's like an elasticated tape, which is plastic. Or more commonly, it's strips of polythene. So you tie around the rootstock and tie a knot at the top, but you've got to make sure it's not too tight, but you've got to make sure it's tight enough. And then you very carefully go around the budwood, making sure you tie around once and then you tie around again, but you've got to make sure you don't tie over on top of the bud. So you tie around below the bud very carefully, and then you tie again, making sure that the bud is in the right position where they join together. How long does it take typically for the chip bud to take? So I would say it depends on the conditions. So if it's out in Madagascar, it could be a couple of months, I would say. So the signs to look for in my eyes are that you'll see some callusing on the outside, either side, of where the chip bud and the rootstock have joined together. but also the bud as well. The bud hopefully by after that period should start to swell as well, and you might even start to shoot as well. One of the problems could be is if the budwood is a lot thinner than the rootstock, or vice versa, where the chipwood is a lot more thicker than the rootstock, is that you'll struggle to get a compatibility and a good take of this cambium layer.